Hello. So at the outset of the video, I just want to say really fast, you know, I don't claim to be a scholar in Hebrew or anything like that. I'm reading out of an NIV Bible, the Schofield edition. Um, if somebody knows better than I do and can argue, or rather would correct me on my understanding of this story and so on, that's fine. I listen. I'm not going to jump up and fight somebody about the story of Job and an interpretation of it that I gleaned from a few verses, and, well, more than a few, but when I read through the book a long time ago. Nevertheless, I will posit the point here that, for all the different interpretations of Job that I've heard, they've never quite made sense to me. I've heard a number of them where they talk about how basically the story of Job is just a story of, this is who God is. This is who he can be. He can do whatever he wants. That is God. They also posit Job as being perfect. It says he's a righteous man, and there were none like him, but doesn't say he was perfect. A lot of people just infer that based off of the description. I don't know if anybody's noticed, but there are a lot of kings. When you read through this First and Second Kings, there are a lot of the good ones are referred to as being. Hezekiah was a righteous man, and there were none like him before. He walked in the ways of the Lord. David was a righteous man, and he walked in the ways of the Lord, and there were none like him before. I mean, that's a lot to say, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily imply that they were perfect. Obviously, we know the story of David, and we know the story of Hezekiah very, very well. They both ended up upsetting God at some points. So, why we infer that, I don't understand. And the thing that I would argue, as far as the story of Job is concerned, is I don't think that it was just God flexing, as some people have taught so many times. There's a traditional belief that that's what the story is. It shows that, God can do whatever he wants. And he'll repay you for it. He was making a point to Satan. He was doing this, he was doing that. I've never understood any of those views. I've heard them. I've been a little hard-pressed to agree. Because the character that God illustrates throughout the course of it is not petty. It's not self-serving. And because of that viewpoint, there are a lot of people that look at this story as a proof that, God is petty and childish, and they justify their stance based off of the fact that he basically does a wager with Satan, in their view. I don't think that's true, though. See, Satan comes up and talks to God about the point that, if God let Satan take everything away from Job and leave him in ruin, that Job would turn on him. And God allowed that. And I would argue that the reason why he allowed that is because I think God knew that there was something there. I think Satan had seen it, and I think God had seen it, and I think God was very well aware of it. I think that there was a seed of something that was a bit off in Job's heart. Now, before we go any further, I just want to go through the scriptures that I kind of based this off of. And there's more than these. It's just, these are the most to the point. So, the first part of it is in Job 29. And I'm going to skip around a little bit, because there are other things in here as well. So, it starts off, Job continued his discourse. How I long for the months gone by, for the days when God watched over me. Doesn't sound so bad so far. And this is at the end, after his friends have talked to him and he's contested them, and he's been in anguish and lost everything, and he's speaking now to end the discussion with his friends. Anyway, skipping down to verse 7. When I went to the gate of the city, and took my seat in the public square, the young men saw me and stepped aside, and the old men rose to their feet. The chief men refrained from speaking, and covered their mouths with their hands. The voices of the nobles were hushed, and their tongues stuck to the roof of their mouths. Whoever heard me spoke well of me, and those who saw me commended me, because I rescued the poor who cried for help, and the fatherless who had none to assist him. The man who was dying blessed me. I made the widow's heart sing. I put on righteousness as my clothing, justice as my robe, and my turban. I was eyes to the blind and feet to the lame. I was a father to the needy. I took up the case of the stranger. I broke the fangs of the wicked and snatched the victim from their teeth. Going down to 21. Men listened to me expectantly, waiting in silence for my counsel. After I had spoken, they spoke no more. My words fell gently on their ears. They waited for me as for showers, and drank in my words as the spring rain. When I smiled at them, they scarcely believed it. The light of my face was precious to them. I chose the way for them, and sat as their chief. I dwelt as a king among his troops. I was like one who comforts mourners. Do you see maybe like something's a little off here? He justifies himself in this way, stating, what he was. And none of the things he was doing were bad, by any account. These are all good things, but it was the heart behind it. So, just real fast, I want to compare that with a verse. And this was the thing that jumped out at me back when I first read this. The comparison to what Jesus says to the Pharisees in Matthew 23. Starting in 1. Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat, so you must obey them and do everything they tell you. But do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. Nothing really comparable so far, really, till here. Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They love the place of honor at banquets and the most important seats in the synagogue. They love to be greeted in the marketplace and to have men call them rabbi. But you are not to be called rabbi, for you have only one master, and you are all brothers. And do not call anyone on earth father, for you have one Father, and he is in heaven. Nor are you to be called teacher, for you have one teacher, the Christ. The greatest among you will be your servant. For whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted. Do you maybe see, like, what I'm getting at here, the parallel between what Job talks about? I mean, specifically stating the desire to sit in those special places, to be honored, he describes himself as, their chief and a king among his troops and all these different things. And this is the thing that's always kind of jumped out at me, is that for all of the talk about how perfect Job is, I would argue based on, this example, among others. I mean, we'll get to another one in just a moment, and something that Elihu actually says to him. But the thing of it was that I just don't think that, I think that Job had something that needed to be dealt with. And I think that it took this much. It took him losing everything to finally see the blind spot here. Or to finally be willing to relinquish this blind spot. I think there was an element of pride involved in Job's heart. And it's not something like obvious. I think it was buried. He did good things and for that he felt he deserved to receive good things. Effectively, this became an idol. That point that Jesus makes about how the greatest among you will be the servants of all, that illustrates so much of Christ's heart and God's heart for his people. I mean, there's so many things that God does where he reaches for us and he does things for us. There's so much that he provides on a routine basis. And when we come to him, he puts us into that place as much as anything else. And see, there are some that may argue that, there was a different covenant at this point in time. I mean, if I recall correctly, Job was supposed to have happened before even Moses, before the law was there. However, to argue against that point, Paul actually talks about this. I believe it's in it's in Romans or 1 Corinthians. Anyway, he describes the point about how Abraham was validated by his faith, and how at that point in time, back before the law was given, it's in Romans 8 or 9. Anyway, but he describes the point that Abraham was validated by his faith, and that at that point in time there was no law. So Job would have easily fell into that kind of scenario here. And the interesting thing about that is that in a lot of ways, God was after the heart of men in this time and place. And honestly, even when you read through the law and look at what God talks about even after the law, during that covenant, it's all the same stuff. You read out of the prophets and what he says through Isaiah, for example. He wanted the heart, and that's what mattered. So when suddenly, Job's taking great pleasure and glorifying himself and feeling validated based off of the good things that he's doing and he's receiving as a result, that's a flaw. That's something that's off in him. That's something that has to be fixed. Because that is a level of pride that will stand between a man and God. And to further kind of make this point is when in Job 35, after Elihu starts in on him, Elihu makes this point. Then Elihu said, "Do you," speaking to Job, "do you think this is just? You say, I will be cleared by God, yet you ask him, what profit is it to me? And what do I gain by not sinning?" The thing of it is that when we're coming at it out of that place, when we're at a place of being miserable and whatever, we often look back and wonder, well, why did I serve God at all? Basically, we feel that we deserve, or that we're entitled to receive good things because we did good things. That's wrong. That's so wrong. If we're to do good things, to be righteous, then we should be doing it as a service to the Lord and to those that we're helping. Not to make ourselves feel better, not to win accolades in heaven. It should be for those around us. If it's truly selfless, it's going to be for those around us. It's going to be for God. It's not going to be for us to receive anything. What we receive is a boon, but it should not be why we run, why we fight, and why we serve the way we do. I think, and I would argue, what I will posit here is that was what Job did not understand. And that's what all of this was needed in order to help him get to the point of understanding this. Pride is a hard thing to remove from the heart. So if you think that this was extreme, I could tell you stories from my own experience and from friends' experience. I've felt very Jobish before. Because pride is hard. And I would argue that is what God was trying to deal with in Job's heart.